You're listening to The Heart of Now, radically honest conversations about living free from suffering, hosted by Elizabeth Rayner and Monica Rose.
Hi, everyone. Monica and I would like to welcome you back to another episode of The Heart of Now, a truth podcast focused on candid conversations with prominent global thought leaders on how humanity can be free of suffering. Our goal as we go through this process is to journey into the unknown via a unique guest-led format. So what that means is we have a series of poignant, thought-provoking questions, each episode building upon the next, with the previous guest designating the best person to continue the conversation with and go deeper in living in truth and joy in the present moment. So for those of you who tuned into our last episode, we had the esteemed Lama Palden, and today we are thrilled to be with her recommendation, the very inspiring Mark Coleman. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Lovely. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Mark's work, he is a lifelong nature lover and is passionate about guiding people into the beauty of meditation and nature. He has led wilderness nature retreats for over 20 years across the globe. Through his organization, Awaken the Wild, Mark leads year-long nature meditation teacher trainings in both the US and Europe. And he is trained extensively in the Buddhist tradition, both in the insight meditation and the Dzogchen tradition. He's a senior teacher at Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Northern California and has taught insight meditation retreats since 1997. Co-founder of the Mindfulness Training Institute, Mark also leads year-long professional mindfulness teacher trainings in Europe and the US. And he also recently founded the nonprofit Mindful of Nature that takes nature meditation work to communities and populations that will most benefit from these resilience building practices. He has many books to his name: Awaken the Wild, Mindfulness in Nature as a Path to Self-Discovery, Make Peace with Your Mind from Suffering to Peace, and his recent book, A Field Guide to Nature Meditation. He lives in Sausalito, right down the street from me, which is lovely, and likes nothing more than hiking, biking, kayaking, and being outdoors. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Mark, your credentials are amazing. We have so much to talk about with you today. But first, I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning back in with us. We're super excited to learn more about Mark and his work. So, Mark, we have a series of questions. Really, the first one is understanding your background and really what has been the most catalytic moment of your self-discovery. We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, I've been doing my own spiritual practice, Buddhist practice, for a long time now, many decades. So it's hard to crystallize it into one, and they all inform each other, those understandings, and build on each other. I would say that I'm going to point to something that's been a growing realization in recent years, which does feel very significant to me, which is the understanding of knowing ourselves as Earth, knowing ourselves as not separate from the environment, the ecology, the ecosystem, the Earth in which we live and breathe and abide and are nourished and fed by. So that realization has come because I've been doing my own personal meditation practice in the outdoors, in nature, for the last 25, 30 years, and teaching for the last 20 years outside in nature, integrating mindfulness and awareness practices. And the more I spend time outside, the more I'm, especially in a more contemplative awareness when I'm outdoors, then the understanding that I think has been true for almost the whole of human history, save the last few hundred years or maybe last couple of millennia, where we've begun to separate ourselves from the natural world through whether it's agriculture or urban living or now technology. For the most of our history, there's been a sense of being one with, embedded into, and completely attuned and immersed in the natural world. And so that discovery for me changes everything, both how I live, how I respond to life, how I hold what's happening ecologically, what I think is necessary for us as human beings to rekindle that sense of kinship and connectivity. And yeah, so that's a continuing, unfolding realization to know myself more deeply as earth, as not separate. So this individual separate being that we most identify with in our humanness, when we realize we're actually not just this physical form, but actually not separate from the world that birthed us and that we inhabit, is a very different way of relating to experience.
For sure. And I am curious, that connection with nature, what would you say to people who don't have access to nature? How do they experience that oneness? And so many people live in metropolitan areas now. How do you guide people who live on concrete day in, day out?
Yeah, it's just harder. I don't have a magic pill, to be honest. The urbanization of it, we now, more of us live in cities than in the country. It was the first time ever in human history, and now spend half of our day looking at screens. That is fundamentally challenging to what I'm just speaking about. That if we don't have access to nature, whatever form that is, garden, park, or more wild places, forests and beaches and oceans, and then to sense our nature as earth is challenging because it becomes conceptual. And the realization of knowing ourselves as not separate from the earth happens through connection and through intimacy with nature. So, which is why I say everywhere I teach, every time I teach, my main message to people is wherever you are, go outside. And having said what I just said, everything is nature, even our cities. I'm living in a timber house. I'm living in a forest, a reconfigured forest, floors, ceilings, walls, and you can go outside of any building in any place, urban or otherwise, and connect with the elements: sky, cloud, sun, earth below us, wind, seasons, migrations, moon rise, sun setting. So there's still a way to connect with cycles, seasons, but it takes more work to both attune to the natural world because we've built over it, and also to feel a sense of kinship that it's easier to access when we're outside in a park or in a forest or in a meadow somewhere.
Can't you take it back, Permana's inquiry, to just the simple nature of, I grow microgreens in my windowsill from seed, right? And then just watching them sprout through the soil, the topsoil, every couple days. That to me it touches into that invitation.
Yeah, every time we eat, I've been thinking a lot about this and teaching a lot about every time we eat food, which we can be so divorced from because we go to the store, we buy it, it's in a package, and it takes just a little cognitive remembering, oh, this, like the lettuce that you might eat or the apple that you ate for breakfast, right? That may have been on a tree or in the earth yesterday. And that food, that nourishment becomes body. Like we're continually renewing our body, our earth body, through food, through hydration. And we're walking soil. We're walking humus. We're walking earth. We're part of the earth's moving surface. And all the nutrients and the elements just recycle through us that come from the ground, come from composting, whatever it is. And we're just part of that cycle. And when we look at a deer or a bird or a lizard or whatever it is, we can sense more easily how those animals, those beings are part of the earth or trees or plants. And yet we have this separation partly from, I would say, Judeo-Christian conditioning, partly from our sort of Cartesian scientific worldview that separates mind and body and humans and earth. And so we have to work at unpacking that and remembering ourselves as earth.
Beautiful.
That is so beautiful. And I do wonder about the connection to impermanence too, that as soil, as a body, being connected to nature. Do you teach about impermanence and that connection and oneness?
Of course. Yes, of course. Mostly my work, 90% of my work now is teaching outside in nature, and nature's really doing the teaching. And one of nature's most obvious teachings is change, transience, ephemerality.
Right.
And so we just have to go outside and I'm looking at the changing cloudscape, the changing lightscape, the movement of leaves, the emergence of emerald green. And yes, every moment, wind, breeze, sounds, light, color, form, animals, birds moving, right? So are we. We can think of ourselves as a bit more static, but we're just like nature, changing, ephemeral, transient. And that's the reasons why I teach outside, is because of the wisdom that nature's teaching all the time. She's the original teacher, wisdom keeper.
And that ephemerality brings us back into our bodies, which creates presence, which creates peace, right? It's just this cycle that continues. And it's very simple, the framework, if we could just tap into it initially.
Yeah. It's, again, one of the reasons I teach outside is because there's a certain accessibility to what you're calling presence or awareness, or to embodiment, or to sensory connection, to aliveness. So much of that happens quite naturally. We go outside and we sit on a bench in our garden or in a park or somewhere, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to be present, to be aware of songbirds, of wind, of beauty, of light, of animals. And nature naturally allures us into presence, into connection. And then also, because we're so intimately connected, because we are Earth, then our body, and we've co-evolved with the Earth. So when we go out into, say, a woodland or somewhere, a park, our nervous system relaxes. The brain relaxes. There's a field of restoration theory where the brain relaxes in nature because it knows the natural world, because that's what we co-evolve with. The city takes more work. It's more stimulating, more stressful. And so when we go outside, we come into the presence of wild things, then we feel the impact of that, which is usually, in nature's mostly, not always, calmer, stiller, more presenceful, spacious. And then also, we're touched by what we see and hear and feel: beauty, joy, delight, wonder. And so it's so medicinal for us, and so important that we go out. And it's such an available resource. Even in the city, you can look out the window and see the clouds forming, or the light, or the glimmer of stars, or the sound of birds on a local tree in your street. And there's something important about that whole remembering and connected process.
Beautiful. In your book, A Field Guide to Nature Meditation, in the dedication, I loved the dedication so much, to the earth and all her miraculous expressions of life, and to all those who dedicate their lives to understanding and protecting the natural world. I hope more of us step into that. That's my wish, right? Because we all could consider doing that.
Yes. It's a remembering again. Like, you come back to that word. We take so much for granted, whether that's the food we eat, the water that we drink. And when we take time to understand our connectivity, so this water that I'm drinking was probably Pacific Ocean a few months ago. And then we had heavy rains in the winter. And then it rains on Mount Tam, the local mountain here, which is the main watershed catchment for our reservoirs. And here I am drinking evaporated ocean, clouds, aquifer, streams. And it's true. It's not just, oh, that's a nice idea. It's real. Wow, and my body now, because I live here, my body is 70, 80% water. So I'm 70, 80% evaporated ocean, rain, clouds, lakes. And that's true. So when I go to that body of water on the mountain, I'm like looking at myself. Oh, hello.
I love that.
You may soon be in me.
Your reflection. Your reflection of that water. I love that.
Right. I love that too. And to me, when you speak of it that way, I get that sense of awe. That just stops everything. All the things that really don't matter to me just come into this like tunnel vision of awe.
Yeah, no, it's wondrous. It's a mystery. It's magical. How does that happen? How does the ocean end up being the tears in my eyes? But it does. Somehow that and everything's miraculous. How does that seed that we planted in the fall, now that's germinating as I'm seeing in my garden, as a young tomato plant, and I'll be eating those tomatoes probably in a couple of months. And how does that happen? All I did was put a seed in this fertile soil, and nature does everything else. And then in some moments, I'll be that tomato, which is the soil, which is also the rains that I'm drinking. It's wild.
It is wild. So much opportunity here in terms of perceiving the world differently. I think that we're on the precipice of that, right? Mm-hmm. So the next question I wanted to ask you is, how can humanity solve the challenges we're currently facing? And you can define the challenges however you'd like. And what are our most profound opportunities, both individually and collectively, within those challenges you identify?
Yeah, as we all know, we're facing multiple challenges individually, collectively, globally, ecologically. I don't think we need to go into those because there are many. And I was thinking about this question and both the challenges and the possible responses. And I think I was trying to get to the root of what's at the root of all these. And I think one of the roots is we're in a crisis of identity as a species. AI is challenging what it means to be uniquely human, right? Since AI in a very short period of time will be able to, and already does it in some ways, think and calculate and deduce and analyze quicker than we are. Often Descartes reduced that human exceptionalism to our thinking process. And now we have technology that outsmarts us in some ways, and we'll do some more and more. So I think that we're facing a crisis of who we are, and also facing a crisis of the way we live, if we continue, will be the force of our own extinction. What does it mean to be facing mortality as a species? What does it mean to realize that we're living in one ecosystem, and that whatever we do or I do impacts others, and whatever they do impacts me? And so I think the gift of this time that many authors, writers, thinkers have pointed to, like Joanna Macy, she talks about this as the time of the great turning. What's being called on us is to wake up a radical re-understanding, or again, remembering of what it means to be human. And indigenous cultures have been living this way and trying to wake us up in some way to understanding that we are embedded and intimately part of the ecosystem, but just one part of many equally important parts of the ecosystem. And we've been living in the last few thousand years with the sense of dominance power over other people, land, species. And so to radically shift to realizing we're part of everything, and everything has an equal right to be here, that's a very challenging message for a species that's known and thrived through dominance. So, I just was at the Goldman Environmental Prize Awards, which is an annual ceremony that a San Francisco Foundation gives these awards to some of the most pioneering environmental warriors, you could say. And one of them was to a lawyer in Spain who was in shock that this one of the biggest freshwater lagoons in the world was dying because of human runoff and pollution. And she, over a long, hard fight, managed to get the lake human rights to be recognized as a legal entity, which was the first time in Europe that a natural system was given entity status like corporations are and like people are. And so that was a beautiful solution since suddenly the lagoon had entity and therefore agency, and therefore we could, through legal means, have ways to protect itself. Reorienting, hard as it is, I think what's being asked of us, we're being asked to understand ourselves as a global species, not as a nation, not as a tribe, but as a species that my friend Wes Niska calls earthlings. We're all earthlings, first and foremost. We're of this earth. And also to realize that again, as I was pointing to earlier, my own realization, like we could say how amazing that the lawyer was able to rally enough support to protect the lagoon. And you could also say the lagoon was acting through her and informing her, and it was a vehicle for her to help the lagoon protect itself. Just as John Seed, when he was protecting rainforests in India, said in New South Wales and Australia, he said, I'm not protecting the rainforest, it's the rainforest protecting themselves through me. So when we see, I think I have agency, but actually maybe the agency is also coming from the earth itself, because we're connected. So why wouldn't the redwood forest around here enlist me to protect and care for it? And so that, I think this is where our contemplative practice comes in. If we're listening deeply, and this is a question I ask of people on retreats, and they study with me, is I ask the question, how does the earth wish to move through you? How is the earth moving through you? Because the earth is always moving through us, because we are the earth. But how does it wish to move through you? And how does it wish to move through you in defense of itself? Yeah. And so it's a question of, rather than thinking, I'm a separate individual self, how can I help protect my local watershed or my ecosystem, which is a worthy thought and cause, but it's also overwhelming because I'm a tiny little speck in the immensity of the global crisis, polycrisis, eco-crisis. But if I think of myself as Earth, what would this plant want to do in response? And so it requires getting out of our head, out of our concepts, and listening, and maybe going to the woods, going to the places you love, the rivers, the streams, the mountains, the desert, the ocean, the marshes, the wetlands. And if I could listen, if I could hear the wetlands speaking, if they were, what would they be asking of me? What would they be saying? What would they be inviting me to enter into? And the first thing they might be like, you people are so quick on coming up with big ideas, but why don't you just come hang out with us for a year and just get to know us and just walk in us and be with us and feel and smell and see us in all the different seasons. And then maybe something of use might come through that. So it's a different way of being and listening and acting. I think we especially in industrialized cultures, we live in this sort of hero's myth of like the individual savior is going to somehow do it. And we've seen the consequence of that often has a lot of negative repercussions. In the same way that people are finally listening to indigenous elders and wisdom keepers of, how do we protect the land? Well, we protect the people who have a deep, intimate relationship with it, who are listening to the forest, who are already knowing what's needed to care for that ecosystem. So it's shifting out of our left brain. There's a place for all of that left brain technological solutions and all the different ways where there's incredible innovation. I'm mostly speaking about the ecological crisis. There are many different aspects of the polycrisis, but because my work is nature-based, that's what feels first and foremost to me. And I do feel like if we don't solve the ecological crisis, every other crisis is going to be upended anyway, because we're going to be living in an unsustainable planet.
Yeah, so it is a primary crisis. I agree.
Maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah. And I think what the tuning in is so imperative. And what I was thinking as you were talking about being with nature and inquiring about what it needs, I came to the word reciprocity with nature. That there's a relationship of reciprocity that happens every day. We receive so much from the earth every day as you're speaking, through water, through food, through the experience. And what is it that we can offer back? And tuning in to doing that is very powerful. And I guess as we move along, Mark, the next question, because I'd love to hear about just really how do we free ourselves from the suffering that we experience. And you've been talking about that and being in nature, but are there any specifics that our listeners could glean from you of how they can work with that?
There's a lot of suffering personally, and So there's, depending on what level we're speaking at here, I think
Yes.
it makes sense to speak about the personal, since that's what we have some agency over theoretically. I think in my decades of mindfulness practice, the radical dimension of mindfulness practice is it's a radical turning towards and meeting what is, being with what is, turning towards what is, opening to what is, receiving what is, beautiful, painful, difficult, peaceful, joyful, heartbreaking, and it means living and holding with paradox, right? So we live in a world and an earth and a time where there's tremendous beauty and tremendous suffering. There's tremendous joy and there's tremendous heartbreak. There's amazing people doing beautiful things every day, helping, caring, protecting each other, rainforests, tending to the sick and the dying. And there's people doing atrocious things of hatred and violence and racism and destruction. And both are true. We live in a world where we have this paradox of a range of experience, of delight of hearing the songbirds. I'm here listening to the Buick's wren singing, comes back here every April to nest and has a beautiful song. And I'm also aware that there's less birds here than there used to be, and that causes some heartbreak. And I'm looking at the beautiful woods down here, the trees in my neighborhood, and I'm also aware that the forests are burning up in Canada right now, and in Nepal, and in Brazil, being burned for cattle farms, and that's horrific. And so we're being asked to bear witness. Mindfulness as a practice of bearing witness to the truth, to what's here, to reality in ourselves, both the joy that we might be experiencing and the sorrow and the rage and the anxiety about life, about the world, about our children. And so to be with, to turn towards, to open to, and then to also explore what is my relationship to the suffering. Do I hate it? Do I reject it? Do I numb out? Do I tranquilize it? Do I blame someone for it? Or do I feel open, grieve, tend to with kindness, with compassion, tend to the suffering of others with care and with so there's the opening to, there's understanding the relationship, and then the third thing is examining the causes. What are the causes of either my suffering or your suffering or the collective suffering? And different wisdom traditions have different understandings of that. When the forces of the egoic mind are unchecked, the negative forces of greed, of hatred, of ignorance are running free, then we live in a world with tremendous suffering and the destruction of the earth and the genocide of populations. And so it's important that we understand the seeds in our own mind of our own hatred, our own greed, our own delusion, and work with those to free those up, because we are the earth and we are connected to everything. So the more we do our inner work, the less likely we are to be continuing to act that out. And that has its own impact. It's small, but it's an important impact. And then we also look to see how those root causes of greed, hatred, and ignorance are running through our structures, our systems, and how to best change those.
You actually answered it in the 3-point solution that you provided to free ourselves from suffering, in my opinion, but I would love to hear if you have more to add to it. How are you committed to truth?
Yeah, but interesting question. So, and of course we could get into conversation about what is truth, but
yeah, exactly. It's a loaded question, Mark. Sorry.
Yeah. And again, I think I have to draw on my practice of mindfulness, awareness, and my Dharma Buddhist practice, which I think of that practice as how do we turn to and be with the truth of this moment, the reality of this moment as we know it, or as well as we can know reality, and to be with it in an uncompromising way. And I think much of human endeavor is trying to avoid the truth or the reality of this moment. So we're trying to gloss over the reality of our pain or the experience of deficiency or loneliness or separation or anxiety or fear. Or so if we haven't had that mental training to learn how to be present, to learn how to be with experience, both beautiful and difficult, then we end up in avoidance and running and reacting and acting out. So my experience of the question of how am I committed to truth is my commitment to being with what is, with whatever's here, whatever's true in my experience, in another, and as much as I can understand the reality of what's true in the world, which is getting harder and harder to discern given all the noise, the distorted, polarized opinions and whatnot. I think, but fundamentally, it's being willing to show up with what's here in ourselves, in our experience, in our heart, in our body, in our minds, in our relationships, which is often not easy. We have bodies that feel pain and aging, and we have hearts that feel sad and grief and anxious and fear, and we have minds that can be distorted and self-hating and critical. And so it's a practice to meet that and to understand, what is this moment? What is happening? Who am I? And how do I be present for that? That's my commitment, is to just being present to what is as well as I know it. And that also means, as I said earlier, holding paradox, that this truth, this reality is always multidimensional. It's relative. My experience of it is subjective. That's my commitment, is just to show up. Like, how do I show up in this moment to what is, with as much care and kindness and compassion, wisdom, and that's the intention, and do the best we can.
We do the best we can. I see that theme of seeing what is in yourself and in nature is a very big theme for your work, it seems to me, which I imagine might be connected to the next question, but maybe it's not. It's like, how do you live in joy in that truth? What brings you that joy?
Yeah. Yes, it is very related to what I've been saying. So for me, I would say the greatest joy comes from my connection with the earth and all that brings, the beauty. I'm looking at the light on the leaves right now, and the wind blowing the trees, and the light lighting up the clouds, and the seagulls doing their aerial acrobatics. And I could comment on 1,000 things just in my vicinity, and I'm sitting in a town. It's not like I'm in the woods. I'm in a town.
In a beautiful town, nonetheless.
In a beautiful town.
Yes.
Yes.
It's one of the most.
It's a great town, and it's a lot of beauty. It's true. But I think, taking a step back from that, what supports joy is first being present, being here, and not stuck in my mind, not stuck in the past or the imagined future, not caught up in whatever emotional drama might be happening, fear, anxiety, whatever. And then also a practice that I do and have done since I heard it in the mid-'80s from the Buddha, which is, there's a line he says, whatever the mind frequently dwells and ponders upon, that becomes the inclination of the mind and the heart. So where are we inclining our attention? If we sadly incline our attention to the TV, not a great place to incline our attention, especially for the news, we will be inclining towards negativity and fear-inducing presentation of reality. If I'm inclining my attention to my mind, that's often based in fear or scarcity, I'm also going to be, the outcome of that is not feeling so good. If I incline my attention to what is wholesome, what is uplifting, what is expansive, what is good in people or in nature or in myself, then my sense of well-being will grow. I spend a lot of time inclining my attention to that which uplifts me. And as I reported, I'll look out the window and I'll look at beauty. I'll look at trees. I'll look at this little orchid on my desk. It's been flowering for the last, can you see that? It's been
that's
flowering
beautiful.
for the last 15 months, just unendingly generative of flowers.
Wow.
And there's beauty everywhere. And in the eyes of a child, in my cat sleeping in the sun, to listening to the sound of songbirds, to what you name it. And again, it comes back to being mindful of what generates well-being in myself and in ourselves. For some people, it's gardening or playing music or reading or being outside or being athletic or connection. So for me, how do I live in joy? I make sure I prioritize what brings joy. Being outside, connection with friends, space for just being quiet, meditation, the simple things in life, enjoying a nice cup of tea. Being English, we like our tea.
Don't forget the biscuit. Don't forget the biscuit.
Biscuit, right? Nice biscuit to Duncan. And so it's an invitation for all of us to ask that question. And when do we see our mind unnecessarily going to things that cause stress? A fearful thought about the future that hasn't actually happened, dwelling in the past, self-judgment, or all the ways that we can really, or comparing ourselves to others, or coulda, woulda, shoulda mind, and then going, oh, I do have some relative agency in the moment. And then lastly, I'd say what really deeper than all that, having explored awareness practice for some decades, it's really the awareness, the knowing, this capacity to be aware that really is the seed of all that joy and being. It's the having a spacious mind, a spacious presence awareness that can hold anything, both the beauty and the sorrow, the suffering and the joy, and be at peace in the midst of it. So whether my back is spasming as it does, or I'm feeling cold, or I'm feeling lonely, or whatever is arising, taking refuge in the awareness that has the ability to be at ease in the midst of all of it. That's the sort of the true refuge of joy. Right. That comes through practice.
Steadying like the mountain, as you say. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know in my work, a lot of people say, I don't have the luxury of looking at my orchid for 5 minutes or watching my cat sleep in the sun or listening to the birds. I don't have the luxury of that. And that to me is heartbreaking because, like you said, it is a choice. How would you respond to that comment about it being a luxury?
Yeah, I would say, I think for some people it is. There's many people in this world who have incredibly stressful lives. They have taken care of sick family. They're working multiple jobs. They're dealing with some chronic autoimmune thing. You name it, there's a long list of things, heartbroken. But I think what you're pointing to is for many people, there's an absence of time, or there's time scarcity where people are just running to survive, working, taking care of the kids, etc. And that's reality for many people. I would say that even though that is true, and the reality for many people, that even within that, some of these things don't take any time. Right? And we spend a lot of time doing things, even when my life is extremely compact and I'm working from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. I know there's still many windows. Like I have to eat. I have to walk to my mailbox. I have to shower. I have to make my breakfast, talk to people, or I'm sitting waiting for a Zoom meeting to start, and I look out the window. Like there are innumerable moments where, to listen to the sound of birds while you're chopping your carrots for your dinner, to glance at a flower on your desk while you're in between emails, meetings, or whatever, it doesn't take time. And so when you're walking to the bus or to your office, and you could be on your phone, or you could be stressing about all the things you haven't done, or you could be noticing, oh, there's a tree that's coming into flower just outside my office that I've never noticed before. It's actually quite pretty. It's a chestnut, and they're coming into bloom right now, and there's beautiful pink flowers and a lot. There's a teaching from a teacher. I learned this from Yosho Khenrinpoche, wonderful Dzogchen master in Nepal. And one of his teachings was to short moments many times. That maybe you don't have time to do a 30-minute sit. That's true for some people. but you have time to have a few moments many times in the day, a few moments where you just pause, you take a breath. You pause, you look out the window and you find something beautiful. You pause and you listen to see if there's anything you can hear in nature. You pause and you remember the goodness of one of your kids. You pause and you're stroking your dog's head and you just take that 5 seconds to go, oh, this is a very beautiful dog and he's always very loving. And, there are innumerable moments in the day, right, where we can touch into connection, appreciation, gratitude, joy, love, right? These are all very wholesome qualities, but it requires that we let go of the trance of being stuck in our mind, or stuck in the trance of scarcity. I'm rushing, I don't have time for anything, or stuck dwelling in the past. It's a practice to be present while you're doing something and find there can be a joy in rinsing lettuce, in washing dishes. Like, it doesn't have to be a chore to get to the next thing. It can be its own beautiful activity. But again, it comes back to the quality of attention, the quality of awareness, the quality of presence. And again, that's what practice supports over time, is that quality of presence.
Yeah, I love that answer. It's like an integration of, they're not two separate. They can be one, they can be unified, but it has to be a continuous choice to do.
Yeah. And presence is required for it. That's really the key.
Yes. Okay, so the last question that we have for you, this has been wonderful so far. Thank you for everything you're sharing. If you had a global microphone, what would you say?
Yeah, it's funny. I was reading an email from a friend of mine, dear friend of mine, who was asked to speak up to, this is maybe not quite what you're asking, but he was asked to speak up to add his voice to the call for ceasefire in Israel, in Gaza. And he said, I could, and here's my response, but does it really matter what I say? Does anybody care about my opinion?
Right.
And who am I to say, given a point of view about something that's so complex and so deeply historical, that anything I would say would be really quite glib in response to the complexity and the nuance of that. So that is a caveat. The complexity of anything that's happening globally. I would say, I would come back to what I started with, so that the question you asked about what's been most catalytic and what's humanity facing right now, I would say, if I had a global microphone that actually people listen to.
Let's assume that everyone's listening.
Everyone is glued to the microphone. Yes.
As opposed to a megaphone and shouting at people.
Yes. No, they are listening intently to this message.
Yes.
What is it?
Yeah, I would come back to what I started with, which is that we have to wake up to understanding that who we are is Earth, that we are the Earth, that we're not just on the Earth, we're of the Earth, from the Earth, connected to the Earth, and connected to all living beings, species, systems. And that the more we understand that, the more we become intimate with place, with our own ecology and ecosystem, the more we understand our place in that, then the more that we will, and the more that we have, okay, I'm going to say two things if I had a microphone. So that's one thing. Knowing oneself as the Earth. And that happens, this is part B, that happens through going outside, being mindful, having a presenceful, contemplative connection with your senses, with your body, to the earth around you, to your garden, to trees, to parks, to water, to whatever it is that, whatever ecology that you're living in, whatever the most natural place that you can find, to begin to develop a more intimate relationship. Be curious, be open, let the natural world fill your senses. And in that, as Mary Oliver points to, where she says, there's nothing in this world, if I pay attention to long enough, doesn't fail to foster wonder, and with wonder, love. And so my intention for that invitation is to go outside, to become intimate with whatever nature is around you, to get curious and to fall in love with it. Because when your heart opens to seeing the beauty of an oak tree, of a hummingbird, of an earthworm, of a iridescent beetle to a buzzard, when the heart is touched, we feel beauty, we feel awe, we feel love. And when we feel love, we of course want to take care and protect the very earth that we're living in and interdependent with. So that's my microphone 2 cents.
Beautiful message from a former punk rock master from London, right? I love it.
Come a long way.
Come a long way. Oh, that's beautiful.
But even when I was a punk in London, because I became a punk, I was a punk, and then I found a Buddhist center and I started practicing mindfulness. And that teaching about inclining your attention, I learned back then in 1984. I was living in East End London, which was very run down at the time, very depressed, very urban. My practice was to notice any natural beauty, which around where I was, the London plane trees that survived the war, a few parks, a few grasses and wildflowers, dandelions growing up through the sidewalk. And that was my practice, to see how resilient, how thriving nature can be, even in the city, and how much beauty it gives. That has been a through line these last 4 years.
I love it. Mark, thank you again for being here, for giving us this space and time to share in your wisdom. I absolutely adore this conversation, and I'm so grateful to you for taking the time. You are welcome back anytime. Please join us again. Anything else from you, Monica?
No, I'm speechless in some ways, because every answer was layer upon layer of enriched thinking. And so I just can't wait to go back and listen to it again, actually, so I can really take it in. So thank you.
Pleasure to be talking with you both.
Next time we meet, we're going to meet in nature and not on these screens.
Let's do that. I'm in.
Thanks so much for being here with us today in the Now. To learn more, visit us on Instagram at the Heart of Now podcast or online at theheartofnow.info.